I'm going to call this the IT weather report because I want to kind of play with that notion that it's in the cloud, and a lot of us are trying to determine whether or not we should go with Azure or with AWS. But soon thereafter I want to roll into the demos because I really want this to be productive for you. And MadWolf is an engineering firm, and we see everything from that perspective. We like to basically test and drive what we recommend to our customers. We just don't do blind recommendations. And as well, we are not just one vendor's mouthpiece. We want to show you both of these. We're Microsoft business partners, and we're also AWS business partners. And we think that perspective will help enlighten your decision as to what sort of platforms you should be looking for in the future. And then kind of finally, as one of my sheriff's deputies, by the way, you're all deputized for this shootout, and these guys will in fact do shootouts. We'll have Charles speak about the systems from a developer's perspective. So who's MadWolf Technologies? We are a soon-to-be 19-year-old IT services firm located here in Washington, D.C. We've really worked on what we consider to be our mission statement, and we realized that what we do is we really help our customers use technology to best achieve their mission statements. So it's in a way, that's our value, is helping you achieve your mission statement. Actually, before I start in with who we are, let me just make a few comments about the facility. I should speak about that. Sort of a word from our sponsor. We're located in this building up on the 10th floor, but we're using the offices of Knology to present here, because we find it works out much better than sitting in a boardroom where you really can't see around people. We're also, as you know, we're doing some filming of this. We will probably be breaking it all down and putting it in a webcast. And so we've got the cameras set up in the back, so I don't want us to be blocking those cameras. But also, when you ask a question, I'd like to use the microphone to do so. But Knology, whose facility we're in, is a great training organization. And MadWolf will train in the systems we build and write. But in the general sphere, if you need office training, if you want to learn how SharePoint works and how to use it, I would suggest you contact Knology. They will either train here or go to your facility. Okay, so MadWolf Technologies. We offer three main service offerings. We do IT support and managed services. This started off many years ago in a break-fix model. Today, it's very proactive. We use tools to monitor and manage and run our systems. We also run a help desk 24/7. A lot of our customers are in the NGO space, so we support offices around the world. We also do application design, development, and integration. That's how MadWolf started 18 years ago, writing custom software applications, primarily for international development banking organizations. And we did a lot of work in the roll-up to Y2K, combining those systems into business warehouses. We're familiar with both qualitative systems and quantitative systems, and particularly business process improvement. Today, we see that business process improvement happening in SharePoint. And finally, we have a data infrastructure and a cloud provisioning. I consider this all to be data reliability, be able to offer high availability systems, be able to have systems that are correctly backed up, that offer continuity of operations to our customers. And all of that is inside of that third level of service offerings. Now let's really get down into what cloud computing is and what we think of cloud computing today. And I'm going to move through this stack because even as recently as last year, we were talking to people about Office 365 and moving email. That is no longer, we don't limit our discussion these days to that level of cloud computing. And I think all of you are familiar and comfortable with what we consider to be this SaaS model. this really started out almost with Salesforce with a SaaS model as well. And it's where vendors will offer their products available to you. You buy it straight out, and it's their product, and you use it, and you don't have to worry about it. And there was a lot of software at that point. Then we move into platform as a service. And this is where you can actually just get hold of particular systems and start running them. But the topic today is infrastructure as a service. And this is when we really delve into the level of what's going on between Amazon, Microsoft, IBM is coming up in it, and this is where you're really doing true server provisioning and dynamic server provisioning out in a data center, or more than one data center, but usually through one provider. And this is the level that is of interest to us currently, and I expect to all of you. This is a sophisticated enough audience that we're not playing up here in Office 365. As I say, a year ago we'd have lunch and learns on Office 365, and people would ask all sorts of questions about how that functions. It's no longer part of it's no longer a feature of where computing is going. It's an accepted level at this point. But when you talk about business applications in the cloud, you have all sorts of things that you have to consider and overcome. What works well in the cloud, we all agree, is email, mostly because it's asynchronous. And response time is not that critical. More critical, though, is with file services. How do you get really fast file services? We now are looking into Dropbox or OneDrive or using SharePoint as a file service. And this will mature, but file services start to stumble into then data access and transactional systems. And still there is some issue with transactional systems being moved to the cloud. They have to really be structured to do so. But another good example of a cloud-based system are phone systems. By this point, most people are on voice over IP. We're not really keeping our PBXs in our closets anymore. Phone systems are a good way to move up. I will, however, say that, in my opinion, phone systems are what I like to think of as a disruptive technology, meaning that it came along, it's faster, cheaper, but really not as reliable as the old phone systems where you would pick up the phone and get a dial tone right away. We're all sort of willing to accept, for the benefit of flexibility, this kind of inconsistency sometimes in voice carriers. Data backups, though, a great one for cloud because it gives you that whole off-site aspect. And then that rolls naturally into DR. And certainly one of the most attractive qualities of a cloud-based system is the cost. On the downside, so I put it in red, you have to be able to overcome the pride of ownership. And there's always that aspect where somebody wants to go in and see their server. They're not really seeing the bits, but they believe it, or your backup, I don't believe it's a backup until I can wave a tape in my hand. I think most of us are past that by this point, but you still run across that, particularly in our business. One of the other aspects that you have to be concerned about are unplanned updates. You're basically now letting somebody else run your systems. They may decide to push an update out. Most of the systems that we run in our data center, we go ahead and make sure that we never run the first release. You always wait, you wait a day or two, you see how the market responds, and then you either push a patch or you run your updates. But if you're having somebody else run your infrastructure, you're relying on them. Oftentimes as well, with cloud-based systems, it's very difficult to get service. And it really depends on who you're working with. Sort of the bigger the organization, the less likely you are to get the same level of service you got when you were trying to buy that service. They got that aspect really working well, but sometimes service can drop down. It's a position where a company like MadWolf can come in and offer boutique service, particularly if it's running in our data center, or we know somebody on the inside. But it's anytime you get that with any kind of service where you work through an aggregator. There's always a question about security, who owns the data, and then finally, one of my big things is the grid. I think cloud service is often sold on the concept that there's really a grid out there and that your data is striped across many data centers. And it's not always the case. It's not the case with Office 365, by way of example. You're in a data center. You're not striped across many data centers. So when we're looking at cloud computing at this level, where we're comparing Azure and Amazon, we're going to work with you guys and show you where the grid really is. And it's not as golden as we once thought it was. You have to look at it clearly and understand that if you want something that resembles grid computing, you're going to be paying extra for it. And that there's always, of course, with any type of replication, you always have the same questions that you have when you have disaster recovery. You really need to know your RPO, your return point objective. But there are a lot of benefits to it. Cloud computing, you've got the benefit of not having to worry about licenses. You can move everything out of cost. You can change your capital cost and make it an expenditure cost. You're trying to get everything centrally managed. Some of these systems have better centralized management than others. We'll demonstrate those for you. There should be the promise of redundancy and resiliency, not only at the hardware level, but at the data center level, and at the pipe level, at the power level. And therefore, it diminishes your concern, your responsibility, never your concern, but your responsibility about DR and continuity of operation. Again, you don't really have physical access to your data. You do have increased security vulnerabilities in that there are now bigger targets out there. They should be better protected, but they are bigger targets. And as well, particularly in the Microsoft world, my Microsoft guy's going to kill me on this, but you've got, I think, limited controls. I think you've got more finite controls underneath AWS, but we'll get into that. You should have limited downtime. You're still, of course, exposed to bandwidth. It's no matter how fast or how thick the pipe is that you're going through, you're going to always be limited by the most narrow port that you've got to get there. And then finally, there's this other aspect that I've always liked to say, is that there is vendor lock-in. And I oftentimes tell people this when they say see how inexpensive it is. Remember, it's kind of like Hotel California. You can check in, but it's really hard to check out, if you remember the Eagles. All right, so anyhow, so we recently got hold of some advertisements from AWS. And AWS, recently in May, published this aspect of the Gartner report. And if you're familiar with Gartner report, particularly this magic quadrant that everybody talks about, this axis is ability to execute, and this axis is completeness of vision. Well, because Amazon put this out, they happen to be right here. Yeah, they're almost off the chart how great they are, right? But it's their chart. And I don't know how clearly you can see this, but Amazon sees themselves here and Microsoft's here. So in terms of ability to execute, Amazon is ahead of Microsoft, and they're a little bit further out in terms of their vision. Down here, in what we consider to be the visionaries and the niche players, you're finding those old school data centers. You've got your CenturyLink, you've got even Google down here. At your IBM, your VMware, rack space is somewhere in here. Right there is rack space. So those are the old school data center players, and they're not, in terms of Gartner, they're not the visionaries, and they don't have the ability to execute the way the two players that we're going to compare today work. It's only fair, though, that we take a look at this next report, which I picked up from the recent edition of The Economist. This tells you where it's going in terms of cloud computing. We all know cloud computing is inexpensive, and that's one of the desirable aspects of it. It's inexpensive, right out of the box, and then it's inexpensive to control and maintain because you've got all those other expensive IT guys running it for you underneath that one cost structure. But here's where we find out where's the money. That's what The Economist is interested in. And I love this. They said if there were a prize for corporate secrecy, Amazon would have an excellent chance of winning, because Amazon's not releasing whether or not they're really making money on this thing. And there's always that question, because we all know these cloud computing guys keep cutting the dollars, keep cutting it back. And so it's very hard to track, is there money? And to a certain extent, you think that they may be all playing that old card game, called Hearts, where you're trying to get rid of all the hearts unless you want to shoot for the moon, and then you want all the hearts. And to a certain extent, it seems that way in what these guys are doing. They're trying to say, we'll keep cutting our prices so that we get everybody in, and then once we have everybody, then they're going to find other ways to exploit that, to make money with it. Maybe raise the rates, maybe not, or use your data, and I'll get there. But what this chart also shows, I think is really important, is Amazon is still a major player, but Microsoft's coming up quick. So what we wanted to do was we put up a chart, and some of you have seen this chart before when you have asked us to do a comparison between Amazon and Azure, which actually is the seed concept for this Lunch and Learn series. And I'm going to have to acknowledge Eric here for being the one to ask the question and drive us to write a chart. But here's the goods. Stability. Azure, there's really a single data center model. Yes, they now have a few others, but it's a single data center. AWS, multiple. But with multiple data centers, the costs increase. So in our mind, Azure is great for the first world. AWS is better for high availability around the world. Cost. They're both per minute, cost per year models. There's all sorts of, the costing is very difficult to get a handle on, but AWS has a slight better advantage because they'll let you buy in for a longer period of time. You make a 3-year commitment to them, the price drops through. So you can play, let me say anything about cost right off the bat. What we're talking about are nickels and difference here. It's not really going to matter if your only criteria is cost. You've got to make the decision on something else because it's nickels and dimes. But if you're willing to buy in for a longer period of time, AWS is willing to give you a better price. Flexibility. Azure is really Microsoft-centric. These guys will argue, but it's really Microsoft-centric. AWS, multiple platforms supported. And again, the choice here really comes down to what are your requirements. Server strength. Microsoft has many options. AWS, they do have Microsoft-specific packages, but they do give you a better grid, in my opinion. If you wanted to spread your data out across centers, I think that's the one to go with. Again, it's a matter of opinion, but it's there. But Azure is coming on fast, as you saw in that last chart. Market time. Azure they're slow but building. Amazon is the acknowledged leader and has been around for years. The market share. Again, Azure is growing, and for your single DCs, they're probably going to outdistance AWS, but AWS is still dominant. Control. Here's where it really comes down to it. If you're a Microsoft shop and you're familiar with Service Center and you want everything underneath one deal, it's Microsoft because Microsoft has it. AWS, you actually have a lot of granularity in a lot of different systems, but it's a different paradigm. And again, these guys will show you that. So it depends where you are on how you want to transition. If you're already a Microsoft shop and you're going to stay Microsoft, that's something to consider in the Microsoft column. Hidden costs. Here's where you kind of get into it. These guys make money on the amount of data that you've got, how big your systems grow. So they're not in the business of pruning back your logs. They're not in the business of making sure your backups are safely and correctly configured. That's really still left to you or a managed service provider. So that's the space where managed service providers such as MadWolf are moving into. We're making sure that these systems are optimized because it's actually in the provider's best interest not to optimize. And finally, you've got your management. Who can handle it? This comes back to that service level thing. It may be just a repeat of that. You've got familiar controls in one case and unfamiliar controls in another case. And we'll show you those and so you can see how they appear. All right, another aspect is what do we do about compliancy standards. Everybody's always about compliancy standards. So this is right off of Microsoft's Azure page. You can go and read it. Basically, Microsoft is saying we've got ISO, HIPAA, FedRAMP. This is new from Microsoft, this FedRAMP, because 6 months ago we were competing on a Treasury offering, and that FedRAMP wasn't available to us then on Microsoft. And they've got these others. And then furthermore, this one over here, there's now a cloud standard service, and it maybe Microsoft pushed it, but here's a new standard for cloud services that Microsoft adheres to. This, very clear, is the AWS compliancy page. And they have it all, and they're real big on their FedRAMP. They also have one that I don't think that Microsoft has, and it's one we ran across called ITAR. And ITAR says only US nationals can work in the data center. So it's a very, very tight standard, and AWS has it. Also, AWS is very nicely set up for dual authentication. You've got RSA. You've got a lot of different kind of things that you can do inside of the AWS structure that inside of the Microsoft structure has to be glued on. So where do I see the value in this? Now, why should you listen to me? Well, nevertheless, where's the value in this? And I say you have to look outside the box. Look what else the provider is going to bring to the table, particularly in other services. And that's where big data comes in and data analytics will come into play. AWS has got a lot of offerings. Google will tap in. You can get your Twitter feeds delivered. This is where you want to play because you can open up your data stores as you need them and funnel in huge amount of data and pull it back. But there is also new data coming available. And that's from ADP. They're now making their data available. And we also have a company that we've been working with called Tableau. And Tableau's got a great system. They'll allow you to put a web object up that you can manipulate and pull and delve into charts and slice and dice it's really a web-based sort of jalopy engine that you can play with so that you can cube your data and really see time series manipulation. And they're willing to give it to you for next to nothing, but you've got to park your data with them. If you don't, and the secret here is, their secret sauce is they can resell your data. If you don't want them to resell your data, then the licensing goes from like $5,000 to $135,000, and you run on one of their servers. But their business is to resell anybody's data that's stored with them, and that's part of your licensing agreement with them. So data is becoming the big issue, and really where we're going with this is not particularly analytics to tell what trends have occurred, but really, and this is the intellectual property that we're all striving to develop, is take all of this data that's now going to be available, and more of it is available, and take it and determine what's going to happen. Once you become predictive, once you're able to start telling the future with the data that's available to you, that's where the value comes in, and that's where real intellectual property takes place. It's no longer the old message that content is king. It's really what can you do with that content and what can you predict is going to happen based on now the availability of that data. And one of the aspects of what you need to consider as well when you're looking into an AWS or Azure solution are what are the data streams that are going to be available to me. Okay, now we get to the show.